my friends, uncertainty about eternity, that's the Godzilla of all angst. And unless that is resolved, we're always going to live with fear. But if that question is resolved, then we have this foundation of courage upon which we can live the rest of our life. This is why I find it so fascinating. That when you look at the priorities of Jesus in dealing with fear, okay, from our text for this morning, okay, we can see how Jesus puts such a priority on dealing with our uncertainty, on dealing with our fear. Jesus, he came back to his hometown. The town of Capernaum sits on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. That's where Jesus based his adult ministry from. Well, the townspeople, they heard that Jesus was coming back. News about Jesus had already spread all around the region. Jesus was performing these mighty miracles. He was teaching as one who had authority. The crowds became larger and larger as they wanted to sit at the feet of Jesus and learn. Jesus came home, and there was such a large crowd that there was no room inside the house. People were hanging through the windows. People were crowding around outside. There was no way that you were ever going to get close to Jesus. It was almost like God himself was teaching that day. Now, a paralytic was brought by 4 of his good friends. This man had no mobility. He couldn't go for a jog around the town. He couldn't take his dog for a walk. But what he did have going for him was 4 very good friends who simply had a hunch. They thought to themselves, if we can just get an audience with Jesus, we're not really sure what would happen, but if we can just get our buddy in front of Jesus, maybe something good would take place. And so these guys, they have this kind of risky strategy, very unconventional in their thought. They were creative, weren't they? They carried their buddy, they see the crowd, they know that there's no way that they're going to get an audience with Jesus. And so they climb up onto the roof, and they dig a hole through the roof. Now, the last I checked, but de-roofing someone's house is unsocial. It's normally frowned upon. Could you picture the homeowner? The homeowner sitting there going, what? You guys, what? The homeowner had to be aggravated. I can't help but think that the paralytic, he had to be a little bit nervous about this one-way bungee jump from the roof. Who knows how much rope? We always picture them like lowering him down with rope. I'd venture to say they hung as low as they could and just dropped him. But there he is, laying at the feet of Jesus. And my own experience, most teachers are not fond of being interrupted when they're instructing. So most teachers would get aggravated with that. But when you look at the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew paints this picture of Jesus where it's almost as if Jesus is smiling. So this paralyzed man is sitting before Jesus, lying on the floor before Jesus. And Jesus issues a blessing that no one requested and no one ever even expected. With a smile on his face, Jesus saw their faith, and he said to the man, "Take courage. Your sins are forgiven." Do you see how Jesus connects courage with forgiveness? Take courage, son. Your sins are forgiven. To which I can't help but think that the friends and the paralyzed man are probably all sitting there going, what? Jesus, that's not what we wanted. That's not what we expected. What we expected, Jesus, what we expected to hear was something like, take courage, son. Your legs are healed. What we wanted to hear, Jesus, was, take courage, son. Your running days have just begun. Or take courage. Your paralysis is over. But do you see what Jesus does? Jesus focuses on mercy before muscles. Well, he takes care of the muscles. But he focused on mercy before muscles, on the soul before the body. And Jesus proclaims some good news. The good news is he proclaims, son, your sins are forgiven. Take courage. Your sins are... You see how Jesus leapfrogs over the body to focus on the soul? Because the priorities for Jesus, They're listed out right here. The top priorities for Jesus, our deepest problem is not a physical one. Our deepest problem is spiritual. Our deepest problem is sin. And our deepest fear is uncertainty. And so Jesus looks at this young man and says, take courage. Your sins are forgiven. Now, I don't want you to miss this because this is Jesus. This is his flagship call to valor. When you look at the Gospel of Luke, this is the first call to courage. 20 plus times throughout the Gospels, Jesus calls his followers to take courage, to be courageous, to be of good cheer. And chronologically, this is the very first one in the Gospel of Mark. He says, take courage, your sins are forgiven. You know, he connects courage with grace. Courage is directly correlated with forgiveness. See, Jesus dealt with the greatest problem, and that's the problem of sin. Now, you know what sin is. Sin is disregard for God. Sin is taking that middle letter and capitalizing it. It's focusing on self, in my wants, and my will, and my desires over and above God's will for my life. Sin is disregard for God. Sin is when God says go north and we go south. You know, the very first commandment is you shall have no other gods before me. Martin Luther said, what does this mean? It means we should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. In other words, we should make God number one in our life, our top priority. We should be living for him, living according to his will for our life. And remember, that was the very first sin, wasn't it? Adam and Eve were in the garden. They were in paradise. They walked and talked with God. They knew God's will perfectly. And God said, all of the trees are for you. Just stay away from the one in the middle. Adam and Eve relying upon self, thinking that they knew best, thinking that they knew better than God. They disregarded God. They ate of the tree. And as soon as sin entered the garden, fear entered the garden as well. Don't miss this. Fear enters the garden in the back seat of sin's convertible. When sin entered, fear entered